Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Overcaffeinated and Dysfunctional. We're your hosts. I'm David.
I'm Josh.
Join us on Spotify at the Overcaffeinated and Dysfunctional podcast. Make sure to give us a follow and turn on those notifications so you get the latest postings. Make sure to give us a follow on X at overcaff_pod. That's OVERCAFF_POD. We'll be making more accounts to be posted soon. You can also go to the Linktree URL in our description below. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 1. Do we have some topics for you? Josh, what do we have to start us off today?
Thank you, David. We're going to be starting off with the use of the National Guard and relevancy to the president, states' rights, and the federal constitution. So, with that, David, I would like to see what your thoughts are. One of my big questions that I had when we started looking into this topic was, does this infringe on the states' rights?
Well, Josh, that is a good question. And when you look at the laws that say whether or not this can happen, there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of gray area. My opinion, I think personally, this is a good thing. Get rid of the crime, make our cities safer, and with that, people live better lives. But when you look at the laws, I'm not sure, all because he didn't invoke the Insurrection Act, I don't think this applies. What do you think, Josh?
Well, I mean, if you look at it, it is a gray area, but does it possibly infringe the state's rights? And I possibly think yes. And I'm kind of on both sides of the aisle on this one, with it being that the states have the right to federalize, but I also believe the president does as well. The president is the overall commander in chief of the armed forces. But when it comes to the National Guard directly reports in a two-stage system to the governor. The governor is the commander in chief of its state's National Guards. So your Air National Guard and your Army National Guard. Do I think it's a good thing is another question. I do think it helps quell the crime rates and does help make things feel safer. What is your thoughts as far as the implications it might have on the community surrounding it?
Well, I think some implications it could have. Well, there's a lot of good things that come from this, right? We can have a safer environment. You know, people are able to go out more. They're able to enjoy. Businesses are able to make more money. They have more patrons walking in, buying stuff. You know, it helps with the money coming in. You know, and then it can lead to people. I wouldn't say violently attacking, but uprising. You know, they think this is a infringement on their rights, and they might rebel. What do you think? What's your opinion there?
So I think it'll be a good thing to help, like I said previously, quell crime rates. And I do think it helps the economy as you don't have people not wanting to not go around anymore. But the problem I see that might come of this in places like Chicago is what might happen if for some reason gang violence ends up killing one of our service members. I don't think that's thought about. What would happen if a gang member ends up killing one of our selfless service members?
Yeah, and that is a good question, and I don't think I've seen anyone in the media talking about that.
So I would like to though go to one that's kind of controversial because of where it's located. Now I've done a lot of research on this topic and found a Democratic alderman from the city of Chicago, reportedly from the New York Post, and we'll attach this in our description so our listeners can read this as well, has come out in support of President Trump sending the National Guard to Chicago. And in one of his statements, this is Democratic alderman for the Chicago's 15th ward, Raymond Lopez, states, "This is a very real war we are fighting here, and we need every tool in the toolbox to win it." In a following statement after that, he says, "If it means working with a Republican president to keep Chicagoans safe, then that is what we should be doing. We shouldn't be playing politics with people's lives," he added. I think it's a great point. I think states should work together with the president bipartisanly. They wouldn't feel this way that it's violating their state's rights if they'd actually work with them.
Yeah, no, I do agree with him, and I do agree that Chicago and a lot of other cities, in this country are facing a huge crime epidemic. And he also stated, and I'll quote him here, "They see through the gaslighting that's going on by many of my colleagues and peers who are just content on pushing forward the anti-Trump narrative. so they can appear to be doing something for the people of Chicago, end quote. What do you think about that?
I like his perspective on it. I want bipartisan support. The only way to move the country forward is by using the two-party political system to the American people's advantage. Start making your Democrat leaders work with your Republican leaders and vice versa. Your Republican leaders work with the Democrat leaders. I think that's the only way. One, we start to quell the temperature in this country. As you know, and as we've all seen, the temperature has risen in this country to a very, very high temp. So part of doing that and quelling that is the two parties coming together and working together.
And I think I don't want to, and I want to just let our viewers know we're not radical conservatives. Like we can see both sides of some stuff, and we're open to new ideas. What do you think? Well, you want everything to add on that before we continue?
Yeah, if you have questions, please comment. We'll answer them honestly, openly, and with fact based opinions. Now, for me, I'll speak for myself. You can speak for yourself, David.
Absolutely.
My morality and ethics are based in the Bible, but can be backed up by basic facts. You can look anywhere and find them in that respect.
Right. So let's dig into this a little more, should we? Should we dig into this a little more here?
Yeah, we definitely can. I mean, one of the things we should probably start with, and actually something I found while digging into this, is did you know there is currently a new Insurrection Act in the House of Representatives right now called the Insurrection Act of 2025?
Would you look at that? How convenient, huh? How convenient.
How
How
convenient.
convenient. How convenient.
It's making what they call small alterations to the current Insurrection Act of 1807.
So let's take a look at that real quick, should we? Before we go on to the new and approved Insurrection Act, because we love insurrections.
Well, yes.
All right.
So I'm going to ask a timed question here of do you think something like the Insurrection Act can become outdated?
Well, that is a good question, and I haven't thought about that one. And I did a lot of digging into this the last few days because I knew you come out with the most out of pocket questions. And before we started videoing, you asked me if I liked hot dog water, so that shows how dysfunctional you really are. So,
I am the dysfunctional in this podcast.
well, let's take a look at what we have here, and then we can come to a conclusion. So, under the Insurrection Act of 1807, it's a federal law that grants the U.S. president with authority to use the military and federalized National Guard within the United States to quell rebellion, insurrection, or civil unrest. Now, there are only three main reasons that a president can invoke the Insurrection Act. One is by the state legislature or governor requests the assistance. The second one is the enforcement of federal law. If an insurrection or other unlawful obstruction hinders the enforcement of U.S. laws through normal judicious means, or to protect our rights that the Constitution gives us.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think a big part of that, and answering the question I had asked you, is what are some cases in recent modern history, I would say within the last 50 to 80-ish years, that this act has been enacted? And one of them was under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, right after the Brown versus, let me see if I can find it here. I had it up. Well, actually, there's one even before that. We used it during Hurricane Katrina, but we also, referring back to the Dwight D. Eisenhower, and actually JFK invoked this act under the desegregation mandate. Now, this was all part of a larger Supreme Court case, which was Brown versus boarding. Did you ever see that one?
I didn't see that one, but I've seen a few others. So, a few other presidents, and I didn't realize how many presidents have actually invoked this law. Franklin D. Roosevelt deployed troops during the 1943 Detroit race riot. Ronald Reagan invoked this act during a prison riot in Atlanta in 1987. And George H.W. Bush, let's be specific here so we don't have anyone in the comments saying anything crazy. George H.W. Bush deployed troops in response to the LA riots of 1992. Now, this goes on to something that just happened recently. In September of this year, 2025, a federal judge ruled that the Trump administration broke the law by deploying the National Guard to Los Angeles in June of 2025 to help police immigration protests violating, and the court ruled that Trump violated the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. What's your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one.
And let's remember what happened in LA in September 2025. They shut down the highways. They were being very violent towards local and law enforcement. This went on for hours. They were not, the local law enforcement were not able to gain control of civilian population or even gain control of their city. I mean, we're talking about the deployment of tear gas. We're talking about rubber, people getting shot in the face by rubber bullets. I seen a reporter who got shot in the face with a rubber bullet. You know, let's think about this. Let's break this down for a second.
The LA riots, and I'm actually going to include something else here because I believe it should have been enacted several other times.
And just for the people who can't see us, Josh has a huge smile on his face. He's excited. He's excited for
Oh, I'm pumped for this one. So, as a lot of people know, we call 2020 the what? The summer of love, baby. The
that was
summer of love.
that was more than just the summer of love.
So in 2020, I also believe the National Guard should have been deployed to these cities. So Chicago, Portland, Oregon. The cops were actually pulled back and told to sit back and not do anything about it. That was civil unrest. You've got burning of buildings, you've got burning of people's cars, looting. And it's an unpopular opinion because what happened around that situation was George Floyd. Now, most of the country did not agree with the way he died, and I'm kind of in that sentiment. But I also agree that George Floyd did commit a crime and had committed previous crimes that led into this whole situation. And I think both were at fault. I did agree with the cops being charged with George Floyd's murder because they did go above and beyond. But I do also believe George Floyd put himself in that situation. Now, going back to the LA riots, I agree with it. And Trump did it perfectly. He threaded that needle very, very well because he went into LA under the guise, and it's not really a guise, he went in under the preception and did, for the most part, go in there to protect federal property, which is well within the presidential rights, especially under when you're looking at constitutional rights and constitutional prerogatives of a US president. Now, there's a little stipulation if you go and read part of the Insurrection Act and also the correlating Posse Comitatus Act, which we'll talk about more as we go through this segment of the podcast. A sheriff has the authority to allow law enforcement or to deputize the National Guard members as Leo. Just in the same way, a sheriff could come up to me or come up to you, David, and deputize us. And then we could act as law enforcement officers and under the same principles. So, and one of the sheriffs, I can't remember his name, came out and said, yeah, we were overwhelmed greatly. And you can just look at the videos, people standing on demolished cars from people throwing rocks through the window, people throwing rocks onto the highways, throwing rocks at cops. Mostly peaceful? I don't think so. Mostly violent? Yes.
Absolutely. And like you stated before, I don't agree with the way that George Floyd was killed. I think it was a tragedy. I think both sides, there was wrongs and rights on both sides. And I think we both agree on that fact. And the way he was killed was insane. And like I told you privately when this happened, I think we had a discussion back when this was all going on. This was a very cruel way to die, and like you already just stated, like the officer that did it got a just sentence. He got found guilty and he's in prison for that, and I support that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speculate because there's a lot of speculation and I don't know enough about the situation. People were saying George Floyd was high at the moment. I don't care about that. That's not really relevant. His actions speak louder than anybody's words could ever say. How did he act towards the cops? And anybody that knows, you can't talk yourself out of a ticket, but you sure as heck can talk yourself into one.
Absolutely.
It's the same way. You can't talk yourself out of cuffs. You can talk your way into some cuffs, though. It just depends on your reaction. Just be nice to everybody you're around. It's simple.
Yeah, and we can't really judge people, and there's only one person who can judge us for what we do or what we say or and that's our Lord Jesus Christ, and that day will come. Trust me, that day will come. Everyone will see it someday. Hopefully, not sooner than later, but
I'm going to interject there. I hope sooner, because the promise of Jesus coming.
He's coming, baby. He's coming, and when he comes, you'll hear the bells of the Lord. Right? Is that what they say? The bells will be ringing.
Get us back on topic, but yeah. So 2025, and then these recent Washington D.C. You didn't see them necessarily acting as law enforcement officers until later on in the deployment, because technically, even being moved stateside is called a deployment under the National Guard. Most of the time, you look at them, they were doing parks and recs items. I saw a bunch of pictures of National Guardsmen going through mulching a park, mowing the grass, weed whacking, before I even saw them authorized to be carrying pistols around when they were walking the streets of DC. They were just monitoring. It was an enforcement tactic to get people to stop committing crimes. Now, you might see an uptick and it go back to normal, but I think you might see some behavioral change just by the act of them being done. Even if it's just under Trump's presidency, you know he's willing to do it. And I think that's half the battle, showing that force so that way you don't have to show it again.
Let's just be 100% here. During the 2020 riots, Trump never invoked the Insurrection Act. He never invoked it, but he did. The National Guard was deployed to protect federal buildings. So, and I think, in looking back now, looking back 5 years from where we are today, I think he should have invoked the Insurrection Act. What do you think, Josh? I think
No, I'm
we would have saved a lot of businesses owned by minorities, people who can't afford, they live based off that check, all that money they make in that month. They live in month to month, barely surviving in the economy already. And it's not cheap to own a business. There's a lot of risk involved, and for the riots of 2020 to completely devastate these people and destroy everything that they worked every day and every moment of their life to create, to just take care of their family.
No, I agree with it. And that's kind of why I said what I said is the National Guard wasn't deployed under the Insurrection Act. They were might have been deployed for protecting federal buildings, but I believe more force should have been involved in that. It should have been a deployment under the Insurrection Act and making people disperse in a peaceful manner. And if people didn't, more people should have gotten arrested. I know a ton of people probably got arrested in those 2020 riots, but more of them should have. If you're going to go out there and just cause a public disruption, if I go out on the street right now and I start drinking and running around and rambling, I'm going to get charged for disorderly conduct just for that. Never mind if I went out just randomly burning a car or going and looting a business.
So I don't know why, but in modern day, in the last, I would say, 5 to 8 years, every time there's a problem in the world, people are resorting to violence. Why do you think we're now resorting to violence over, obviously there's been violence along history, but I feel like today's society has been more violent in the modern day. What are your thoughts there?
I'm glad you asked. The increase in violence can be discussed in many different ways, but I have one belief and one reason on why I believe we've started to resort to violence for difference of opinion or just because we don't like something. And there's one reason. We've moved further away as a country from God. And I don't have this web page saved, so I can't link it, but you guys I'm sure can find it. There was a news article put out either today or yesterday stating that a city building in Ohio wanted to remove the placard in the floor of their city hall. What did that placard say? In all things, or it wasn't in all things, it was something to the likeness of find our strength through God Almighty. And people might say, oh, this country isn't rooted in Christianity. It most certainly is. Go look back at our founding documents. The Declaration of Independence, for people that don't know, mention God 4 different times. They mention God in a plethora of ways. He is the supreme justice. He is the creator. He is the legislator. Our Congress originally believed in God and believed he was the ultimate being. And even if you go to our Capitol building in the House of Representatives, it says, in God we trust, behind where the Speaker of the House sits. Now, that was put in place in the 60s during the Cold War, and it was a retaliation towards other states, not states, but country actors, towards communism, that we believed in God. There was a higher power, and the higher power's name was God. It was not government. We put too much faith in our government to take care of all our needs, and that's not how that works. We need to rely more on God, and we will see more things I hate. that it had to happen for us to see this, but a great primal example of this. Look at the killing of George Floyd. Look at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk. What happened with each of those? George Floyd's heinous murder was met with riots, looting, burning, Molotov cocktails. Charlie Kirk's heinous assassination,
And
vigils,
and one of the
memorial walks.
in one of the biggest, I would say one of the biggest uh worship services that we've seen in modern time. What was it? Last Sunday, the biggest what was that, the 21st? I want to say September 21st. The Charlie Kirk Memorial there in Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah, and for those that don't watch football, Glendale State, I think it's called Glendale Stadium, holds 65,000 people and was jam packed. And not only that, they
And they
still had
had an overflow arena. They used the arena across the street, overflow.
overflow.
People were coming from all over the states, all over the country, every state, flying in their own personal dime, their own personal money, their own personal dime to get there for this memorial service. That speaks volumes.
Not only that, but did you see the reports come out of England? It was not just a US revival come up. You had London, Madrid, a few places in Germany I can't remember, Berlin. London had 1 million people walking the streets in a civil manner. Kind of like it reminded me of the times of MLK, and not equating the two necessarily in weight and equivalence, because that's a bigger discussion that I think we can talk about later and really dedicate some time to that, because that's a very big turning point for both sides. But MLK's was very civil for the most part. Sit-ins, the March on Selma. These were very peaceful inactions. And it was met with the cops are just here just to make sure nobody does nothing. Cops really never had to get involved.
Now, do you think this is partly do you think partly to blame for this is the rhetoric being spewed by politicians on both sides of the aisle? I mean, it happens on both sides, but do you think the reason we become more violent in modern day is because of the rhetoric being spewed about each other? For instance, the left calling Trump a Nazi, or the left calling Trump a racist, or I mean, Trump's said some not so nice things about people on the other side. But that's the point I'm trying to make, though. Do you think the rhetoric on both sides of the aisle have caused our local, not even our local, our nation as a whole to become more violent than it used to be?
Percent. So, and you and I have had a discussion on this before. There's two varying ends of the spectrum. You have the way far right, the radical right, and you have the radical left. And on both sides of these spectrum, you have people that just go off of what their favorite politician says. If I'm calling someone a Nazi or a fascist or a racist, and yeah, there are gonna be people out there that take that to the extreme. I mean, if you go back to the 90s, being called a Nazi meant we need to take that person out. So spewing hateful rhetoric and this mudslinging combat that we see now, sure, yeah, 100%. I bet you it does play a role. Back in the 50s, the 60s, the 50s, the 30s, words had meaning. Now we just throw them around like, here's a tissue for your tear. When if you got called a racist, a fascist, a Nazi back in the 40s, 50s, 30s, it was a man, I need to take a look at what I just said to make sure that wasn't that kind of rhetoric. And it's very, very true that the more you use the word in a frivolous matter, the less meaning the word carries. I bet you don't see. If you were to go ask your grandfather, your great grandfather, you can even ask your parents and ask, what was it like to be called a racist in the 60s versus being called a racist now? And I'm willing to bet you they'll be like, it was a different meaning. You actually did some soul searching if someone called you a racist.
Well, I think the biggest problem too, and here's my opinion on this. And I agree with you. I agree with you. I think part of the rhetoric that's being spewed by politicians doesn't help make us less violent. And I think the reason why people are using these words and they're not meaning the same is because they're being thrown around more than they used to be. Like you said, back in the day, to be called a racist, you were being hunted down, or if you were a Nazi, you'd be hunted down. But in modern day, if you disagree with somebody, and you don't believe in what they believe, you're a racist, or you're a Nazi, or you're a fascist. So the words, they have the same meaning, but they don't hold the same value. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, they hold the same definitional meaning, but the weight does not carry. And I think part of what you said also, the meaning of the word. People just throw around fascist now and they don't know what it means truly. What does a fascist look like? They can't tell you. So we're throwing around these words without actually knowing what they mean. And that also diminishes the meaning and the weight that that word carries. If we're going to call someone something, make sure you know one, what the meaning is, and two, that the actions match your word matches their actions. That's how we bring weight back, not just throwing it around out there. That's why nobody takes offense to it no more. Nobody looks at it any different. Oh, you were called a fascist today. I was called one the other day. And all I said was, hey, how are you? And held the door open for him. Now, obviously, that's an unrealistic scenario, but just that's what we're seeing in today's day is an unrealistic scenario. And then someone not liking what you said and you getting called a fascist because your political beliefs do not align with that person.
Well, that's true. And back when back during our grandparents' time, way before you or I were even a twinkle in my dad's eye, our parents' eye, we weren't even thought of. If you were a Democrat and I was a Republican, and we had a disagreement about, let's just say, on anything. Let's go with this example, the Insurrection Act of 2025, or anything in general. We could have our disagreement, we could have a discussion about it, and we could still sit at the same table and split bread together. Now, and I've experienced this too, especially during the 2020, summer of love, as you stated. I've had family delete me and block me off Facebook. I've had, I mean, the amount of, I can go on for hours talking about the way people have reacted towards my views. And, back in the day during our grandparents' time, we were able to disagree and still sit down at a dinner table together. Now, if you have a disagreement or you don't believe in what the left believes in, you can't even go to the family reunion anymore. No family reunions, no birthday parties, and it's like pressing the block button or remove button on Facebook just kind of takes you and picks you up and throws you out of the family tree.
Yeah, no, that's very, very, very true. I mean, I've experienced it on my side, and it's not letting politics get in the middle of family or friend relations. I mean, like you said, we can sit here and disagree about something, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. That's our political view. So politics is politics. Don't let it get in the middle of your family relations. That's just, it's unthinkable, incorrigible, whatever word you want to use. It's ridiculous to allow politics to destroy the relationships you have in your life. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and one thing we want to remind everybody is you have politics here on Earth, but when you pass, there's no politics. And I would say someone's views doesn't define them. Well, I mean, let me take this. Let me take this a little further. Someone's views can determine who they are and what their characteristics are, but someone's innocent views on politics doesn't make them a monster, a Nazi, a fascist, or a racist. So let's take it. Let's look back at the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. So let's take it back here. I think we got way off topic here, but it's conversation's going well, and we did say we're dysfunctional, and we probably had too much caffeine today. So
Well, you just got to follow where the conversation leads sometime. And it
absolutely,
was well within the regarded rights of it. We were talking about political violence and the reason for the discord we see today. But going back to that Posse Comitatus Act, and actually, this is where it leads into it. If you remember back a few minutes ago, the title of the act comes from the legal conception of Posse Comitatus, the authority under which a county sheriff, another law enforcement officer, can concept any able bodied person to assist in keeping the peace. So that's another where I had talked about a sheriff can deputize you. That's where that falls under is the Posse Comitatus Act. This was signed into law by President Rutherford B. Hayes in June 18th of 1878. And it was part of an army appropriation bill following the end of the era, and the act has been updated a couple times in 1956, 1981, and 2021. Now, the 2021 was leave. So 1956 expanded the scope of the Posse Comitatus Act to the United States Air Force. Now, a reminder for some of our listeners out there, the United States Air Force was not added previous to this because it did not exist. When air superiority started coming around, it actually was under the Air Corps. So the United States Army was actually called the U.S. Army Air Corps back in World War One, World War Two.
So I think something important of this law is it's a federal law that restricts the use of U.S. military to enforce domestic civilian laws. This is important to uphold the American tradition of keeping military and civilian authorities separate. And again, the only way to get around this law is to invoke the Insurrection Act. Now, knowing this information, and like I said, we said earlier, there's a lot of gray area here. A lot of gray area, not within the Posse Comitatus Act, but in the Insurrection Act. Do you think any reform is needed?
I don't necessarily think there's any reform needed to the Posse Comitatus or the insurrection. Now, maybe because when I think of reform, I think of a large, massive escalation of change. We can make an amendment to it, but in the Insurrection Act, I believe that is fully within the power of the executive to make action. And there are steps and ways you have to prove that it's an insurrection. So I believe the steps and plus the different ways that it can be approved make it a timeless document.
No, and I agree. And I don't think like you said, I don't think we need reform, but I think we need to amend it, right? Make it black and white so you can understand what you can and can't do under this act. Like we said before, we do support the Trump sending in the National Guard to these bigger cities that are crime ridden. But does it pass the sniff test? And when it comes into a court, it needs to pass the sniff test.
Well, that's the great thing about the way our government is set up. Congress can oversight it and review it. And not only that, they can bring the executive to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the final law of the land. If the Supreme Court decides, hey, you can't be doing this, then that's it. The Supreme Court has spoken. Or if the Supreme Court goes, hey, that is lawful, that's it.
So do you think instead of amending or adding more to this law, because this law already has multiple sections of it, do you think it's worth sending it to the Supreme Court to get a ruling on what you can and can't do under that?
I mean, I think it would be worth it. I will never be against challenging something. If you believe it's wrong, I believe it should be challenged. It doesn't matter. They can bring them to court, and worst comes to worst, they tell them to stop. Worst comes to worst, they tell them to keep going, depending on your viewpoint. But then under the guise of our entire Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, everything that has been written about this country, all the laws that have been put in place, that it's fully legal. If legislation thinks that it needs to be brought to the Supreme Court, then I say bring it to the Supreme Court. Go ahead and try and challenge the standing.
No, and I agree, and that goes with everything. Everything. If you don't disagree with some, or you don't agree. Wow, I'm talking gibberish right now. If you don't agree with something, right, and you go through all the courts and everyone keeps rejecting it, you end up going to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court's the rule, the law of the land. And you'll see this with a lot of other things like the Second Amendment cases or civil rights cases. And I think personally, instead of going in and trying to rewrite the rule books, we send it up for for an explanation of what you can and can't do.
Yeah, no, so challenge it. If they think they have enough to challenge it, go ahead and challenge it. Don't talk. That's also a big pet peeve that I have about really anything talking about politics is and athletes. And I had this problem with the NFL too when they did the kneeling during the national anthem, and that's another whole topic too in itself. If you're going to try and make a political difference, actually do the steps. Yes, do what you're currently doing to protest the system, but actually go out there, meet with your city leaders, meet with your congressmen, tell your representatives. People forget. I'm actually going to quote someone here. So this is the first inauguration of Ronald Reagan. In quoting him, it says, "From time to time, we have been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self rule, that the government by an elite group is the superior to the government for people, or for, by, and of the people." Now, if we actually look at that in its totality, what Ronald Reagan is saying, we are governed by consent, and it's written in our Constitution, it's written in our Declaration of Independence. We are the bosses of our federal government. We need to start pulling that back from them and be like, listen, you're going to listen to us.
What is the saying? By the people, for the people?
Yeah. So
Oh, go ahead, Josh.
moving around here, we've talked a little bit about violence, and that's a topic I've wanted to touch on. Gun violence. There's been a lot of things, and gun control gets tied into that, but that's a different topic. I don't think there's a such thing as gun control. Gun control obviously doesn't work, because if it worked, you would see the results of it working. So bad people are always going to get guns. And you can see this in another society, England. England has huge restrictions on knives. You've actually got to register your knives with the British Parliament, British government agencies. And guess what they're doing now? They're handing out chainmail to their officers because they have so much knife violence. If knife control or gun control actually worked, would England be giving out chainmail? We're degressing. We're going back to the
The days of the knights in
1400s.
armor. Knights in armor. We're going back to the knights.
So if it actually worked, why are we handing out chainmail?
Well, if you look at the statistics on the FBI website, the crime data website, it actually shows. I mean, if you look at 2020, crime was up. It was very high during that time for multiple reasons, right? We had the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. We had the riots of 2020. Like there was a lot going on then. But if you go back even to 2015 to 2024, because statistics for 2025 obviously aren't out yet. 2015 to 2024, gun violence has significantly dropped lower in today versus back in 2015.
I'm glad you brought this up, and we'll leave a link for this as well. You can go to, I think it's called their window viewer on the FBI stat sheet. But I've actually got this broken down, and we'll talk about posting it too if we want to post it. But this is verified stats, and I have some notes in here additionally that aren't verified. It's kind of an estimation. It's hard to find some of the data. So looking at the gun violence, I adjusted the number for rough estimate of gang violence by gang related incidents and justifiable homicide. Now, I want to dive into justifiable homicide so people understand what that is. Justifiable homicide is when there's an attack on yours or someone else's life, and in the pursuit of protecting your own, you kill someone.
So let's say you're being attacked with a guy with a knife chasing you, and you take care of business like you have to defend yourself. That is what you're talking about, correct? We're not talking.
Yes,
We're
and
not.
that
We're not trying to justify homicide here. Just so people are aware, this is a self-defense situation where your life or your family's life is in danger, and you defend yourself in a way that no man would ever want to.
Yeah, and if the listeners want us to dive more into justifiable homicide, there's a lot of other aspects to that to consider it justifiable homicide that I've read up on, and would be happy to do an episode or a quick clip of what that might be. But for the sake of this, we're just going to focus directly on the numbers and other facts that we have found. Now, in 2024, there were a grand total justifiable homicides by weapon. Now, the definition of weapon can come across a whole spectrum. Anything can technically be a weapon. And that's why I hate the term assault rifle. AR does not stand for assault rifle. AR stands for the company that originally made the platform, called Armalite.
Pew
If you're
pew
going to call
pew. Gun facts with Josh.
if you're going to call something an assault, I can pick up the wrench that I have sitting right next to me right now, and that's an assault wrench. Are we going to start serializing and registering my wrenches? No, that's a little ridiculous.
If you have a steak knife in the UK, you might want to register that.
You do have to register. I believe so. I'm pretty sure you do. But back on topic, there were 382 of those 432 instances that involved a firearm. Now, a quick breakdown: 260 handguns, 10 rifles, 2 shotguns, and firearm type not stated 110. Now, if you look at the crime stats for 2024, there were 15,795 crimes. 17 of those were committed with firearms. Now, by my rough estimation and the hard facts with the justifiable homicide, that number reduces to 10,144. Mind you, these numbers do not include suicide by firearm. And if I remember correctly from what I read, this also includes homicides, or justifiable homicides comprise of not only citizens, but justifiable homicides determined by police. So 6,246 handguns, 401 rifles, 149 shotguns, 356 other guns, which I don't really understand. There's only really a few different types. I don't know how there's other guns. Firearms not stated. Listen, 4,565. Now, if we dive deeper into this topic just beyond the numbers, because the numbers are a face value reflection, what do we think causes so much gun violence in the United States? There's a lot of reasons. And one of my theories, people always use the mental health, and I agree to a certain extent. But I believe it's that we've gotten away from the family unit. Now, what do I mean by family unit? The mother and father are no longer together. The father either has little to do with the children, nothing to do with the children, or is very, very well separated from the child. And there's a lot of statements going into this by other places. But before I get into that raw data, what is your initial thinking on current gun violence?
Excuse me. Yeah, well, I think like we stated earlier, violence is definitely the stats show that the violence from 2015 to 2024 has decreased by a lot. Now, any violence is not good, and I will like to let you know that under a study that was done, it showed that 40% of criminals with intent to commit an act of violence, 40% of those criminals did not commit the violent act and fears that the victim was armed. Now, that's not saying that a gun was drawn or a knife was pulled to defend themselves. We're saying, I did not commit the crime because I was worried that they had a firearm. And I believe that's, you know, I mean, in the free states, you don't need a license, but here in, in the states that try to take your rights away, you need a license to carry a firearm. And people how do I put this? People who carry firearms daily to protect themselves and protect their family are more likely to be able to defend themselves in a situation where if you didn't have the firearm, you aren't able to defend yourself. And in some situations, it's not even about gun versus gun. How about the girl on the subway that was stabbed in her neck with a guy and a knife? Even if she had a chance to face that guy and try to defend herself, we're talking about a 6 foot man versus what, a 5 foot female.
There was a guy walking down the street. He passed one cop. He came up on the second cop and killed the cop. And when asked in an interrogation, you passed a cop earlier while you were walking. Why not shoot him? His direct quote was, "Well, that cop was paying attention." So if I think part of it too is get off your phone, look around. Situational awareness is a big thing. If you're looking around, there's a bunch of statistics out there that I don't remember and I don't want to recall falsely and mislead people, but it's a high percentage that if you're looking around and not staring at your phone, you're a lot less likely to become a victim of violence, just in general. And that's across the board. You're less likely to be a victim of gun violence, rape, knife, you name it. You are less likely to become a victim if you are paying attention. And then some of this, I mentioned mental health. So, one of the sides I want to back that is this report, and I'll link this as well in our description so you guys can read the report as well and make your own opinion. Is the Daily Citizen came out, made a report recently, and it says, and I quote, "The U.S. Department of Justice National Institute of Justice recently reported that a persons who committed public mass shootings in the U.S. over the last half century were commonly troubled by personal trauma. Before the shooting incidents, nearly always in a state crisis at the time, especially NIJ reported, suicidal ideology was found to be a strong predictor of perpetration of mass shootings. In fact, among young people, NIJ reports that 92% of mass shooters committed by those in age range of K to 12th grade were found to be suicidal at the time of the shootings, and 100% of college age shooters were suicidal at the time of the mass shooting. So there is correlation to both sides, I believe. I believe the fatherlessness does not help the situation, but you can't deny the facts about mental health. I mean, including what, 6 years we've just had where there was a transgender related mass shooting. Another report of this here is by UCLA School of Law Williams Institute. And I'll post this one as well so you guys can read and make your own. And a study just goes and shows the mental state of the people. It does not relate to the numbers of the mass shooting and their likelihood of a mass shooting or shooting in general. This just speaks to the state of mind. A new study from the Williams Institute of UCLA School of Law finds that 81% of transgender adults in the US have thought about suicide. 42% of transgender adults have attempted it, and 56% engaged in non suicidal self injury over their lifetimes. Now, again, that's not stating that they're going to, but it's a pre indicator. And those are big numbers for such a small community. If you look at it, the rough numbers like 1%, it might be like 5% of the United States now is in the LGBT community. And 1% of that 1 to 5 is transgender persons. So if you have overall 81% inside that community thinking about suicide, what were the other numbers there? 42% attempting it and 56% engaging in self-injury non-related to suicide. Those are some high numbers and you can't deny the facts about that. And I did research on this number is going to be old a while back. If you compare the country of Denmark, and I think I did this research in 2018, 2019. So the like I said, these numbers will be outdated. Denmark had a lower suicide attempt rate than the transgender community here in the United States, which is, and it's not by like, oh, 12%, 1%. It was 38% to Denmark's national average of 12%. And that's a lot bigger portion of the world population than the transgender community inside of the US. So I think the transgender community is a snippet of the whole, but it also shows us a larger, broader picture that there is relation and correlation to mental health.
No, and I agree. There's many reasons why our country's mental health has declined, and I think a lot of it is, the opinion surrounding mental health. The what do you say there? How do I put this? The way people think if you get help, you're crazy. You know, and I think another problem in this country is people can't afford mental health treatment. Some insurance companies don't pay for it, and some Americans just can't afford health insurance. Just blatantly can't afford it.
But don't you think that the mental health side has become less stigmatized over the last 20 years?
I mean, yeah, it definitely has. But if you look at if you go back and look at how mental health was treated back in the day. Now we go back to having psych wards and mental hospitals. Yes, there were some of those hospitals were very bad conditions, and during the deinstitutionalization of those hospitals, us as Americans decided we're going to put these people back into society and we're going to treat them in society. Now, the same people that would end up in these prisons, or not prisons, Jesus, the same people who would end up in these wards, right, or these hospitals, where are they going now? Where are they now? They're either homeless, in a jail, in a residential program that's equivalent to being in a psych ward. So does closing these institutions for mental health crisis, people in mental health crisis, does that solve the problem, or does that just push the problem on another department, like to prisons or even to the streets? You put these people in the streets, and these people are committing crimes, And I'm in Boston every day, downtown Boston every day, and I would say majority of homeless people in downtown Boston either have a mental health crisis or they're addicted to drugs. What are your thoughts there? Do you think the deinstitutionalizing these hospitals, do you think this helped? And I understand some of these hospitals weren't in great condition, like there were terrible conditions, right? We both can agree to that if you look back at the history of psych wards and mental hospitals. But don't you think we should have maybe reformed that instead of going ahead and just pressing Control Alt Delete? Do you think that could have fixed the problem there?
Yes and no. And the reason why I say that is consent. I think a person has to consent. So a lot of times you would also see them not consent. We would just section them on a hold. Now, I do believe involuntary section, like when I was a volunteer firefighter, we would have a code for involuntary sectioning of someone. But, I guess it depends on the degree in which the state the person is in that current moment. So, involuntary sectioning of someone might be justified, but I also agree there's some people that probably got sectioned that they didn't necessarily need to be sectioned. They just needed some help coping mechanisms. Now,
Yeah, but don't you think those people could have been saved under a reform versus a complete cancelization and closure of these hospitals? Don't you think we should have said, let's go back and look at the criteria to be admitted to these hospitals. Okay, you don't fit this criteria anymore, so now you can't be, admitted, or we can't hold you essentially.
but one of the biggest things that I think has led us this way is Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society Bill. And Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society Bill, he made a speech on this, and this isn't verbatim. You can go back and look at his speech and what he said in direct words. But in his speech, I believe it was at Michigan, he directly said, "We are going to, as the government, replace the position of God. We, the government, are going to be there for your every need," which I think is wrong. So, deinstitutionalization of mental health care hospitals and psych wards is a twofold answer. In one part, I agree with getting rid of them shrinks the size of the government. I'm a small federal, little bit bigger state. Your municipality is your biggest. And they still were very restricted in powers, which we have way far gotten away from. But now looking back, also on the other side of the coin, reforming them, yes, because that was something we had for a long time. It was already built into the government. Now, I believe this is technically actually a three-parter because healthcare in the United States is a problem. Healthcare needs to start stepping up and actually doing what they are there to do, be healthcare providers. Mental health is part of healthcare. If they're not willing to start providing this care, then we start shutting them down. Start making companies that actually take care of people's health. We see it every day, and it's not just mental health that they don't care for. There's a lot of stuff people get denied for that they shouldn't, or they have to pay $18,000 out of pocket for a necessary surgery or operation just to keep them alive. And I think it's ridiculous.
And I just want to add on to that, and we know it's not the medical providers, the doctors and nurses that are in it's the big corporate insurance corporations that are denying this or making you pay fortunes, fortunes. But so the deinstitutionalization of mental facilities started to happen in the 1950s, and in the 1960s it gained momentum. People were, shut it down, shut it down. So a study by Mental Health America reports that 50 million Americans experience mental health illness, and that's in today. These are today's statistics. 15% of that 50 million Americans have substance abuse issues as well. And out of the 50 million, more than half, 28 million Americans go untreated. Why do they go untreated? I'm sure there's various reasons why. Now, during the 1950s, before we started the deinstitutionalization movement, there were
Big words are hard.
very hard, very hard. This is what happens when you get up at 3 in the morning for work. So, during the 1950s, there was approximately 550,000 patients that were admitted or currently in the 1950s were currently in these hospitals of these mental institutions. A study in 2019 shows there was only 100,000 patients in these facilities. So where did the other 400,000 patients go? Where did they go? Now I understand maybe 25 to 40,000 of these people probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. 1,000 mental health patients onto our streets, in our prisons.
What years were those between again?
It started in the 1950s, gained momentum. Oh, you talking about the statistics of people?
Yeah, so where did those, in what time frame did those 400,000 go away?
1950s to 2019. Now I understand people die, but the mental health doesn't go away. Let's just say for 10 people who die, 5 or 6 maybe get readmitted. Is that right or wrong?
To make your brain twitch a little bit. So if the 1950s is when it started, and in the 1960s it gained momentum, what happened in the 1960s?
What are you trying to point at here?
And I believe it, if I'm correct, 1964, LBJ's Great Society Bill was passed. And that's linked to multiple things. The Great Society Bill was linked to the model city. Guess what one of the first model cities was? Detroit, Michigan. How well has that worked for Detroit?
Again, where did these people go? Onto our
Probably
streets.
Detroit.
Yeah, Detroit. Onto our streets, into our prisons, into these, into these residential programs. Now, I work with a guy who was a former correctional inmate. Yeah, correctional inmate. Correctional officer. He was an officer at one of the local jails.
Wrong side of the bars.
Wrong side of the bars. He had the cuffs. He wasn't in cuffs. What was that? You could talk. He's probably the only one that could talk his way out of cuffs. So, going back to what I was saying, is we had a conversation a while back when he first started that prison wasn't what it was supposed to, or isn't what it's supposed to be these days. There are more people in prison today that are there because of their mental health crisis. I mean, he was telling me stories that he had a guy, he's in a pod, 2-tier pod, and the guy middle of the day, they're out of their cells. Guy goes up to the top tier and jumps off the second tier. Instant death. Or how about the guy who, shoved a pen in his eyelid?
There's so many.
Or the guy.
I mean, we can
keep going on for hours about this.
Yes. So I think the burning question now that we've kind of discussed the statistics, the background of each one, is where do we go from here? Now that we know all the information we know currently, what of our following steps? And I can tell you, gun control is not the direction to go because you're not restricting criminals. Criminals are going to get a gun no matter what. And gun control only restricts your law abiding citizen who cares about the law you just put in place.
Criminals are criminals because they don't follow the law and they commit crimes.
I'm going to quote, again, I don't know the sheriff's name, but there's this sheriff. He was on one of the other podcasts I listened to, and they had asked him about the same question. And his response was, if you think a criminal is waiting for a piece of plastic permit to come in his mail, you need to check your thinking. Because the criminals I know don't care about that piece of plastic.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And that couldn't have been said any better.
So the burning question is, then what? If gun control is not the direction to go in, and we want to curb violence in this country, where do we go? And I think we pointed out two very good directions and where the faults were in the society that has caused what we are seeing. So how do we correct those faults or help remedy those faults in this process?
So in my opinion, I think the first thing we do is tone down the political rhetoric, right? And we got to get back to a place where we're able to disagree with people and get back to normal life, right? Like if me and you have an argument today, we need to get back to a point where we can shake each other's hands and walk the other way, or even, still have that disagreement and then 10 minutes later be sitting down eating dinner together. That would be step one. Trying to get back to where we were 40, 50 years ago. Then where do we go from there? Now we're back to a point where we're not killing each other over political views.
So I think part of it is what we do is we also get away from the welfare state. The welfare state helps to incentivize a broken family. So if we can start making it so fathers stay in the family, and I brought this point up to you off the podcast before, and I can say for most of us that grew up in a whole household, who was the disciplinarian of the family? Who, when you messed up, who was the person you were like, oh no, oh dear. And I think for the majority, it's going to be, my dad is going to beat my behind. And I think that's something else we have to do in this society as well, is stop this gentle parenting. Teach kids that there are consequences for their action. No more of this, oh, don't hit mommy. That hurts mommy. I know you have big feelings. If I ever hit my mother, boy, I was going to find it in 2 rounds. The first round was going to be my father. The second round was going to be my grandfather. So bring back the disciplinarian. And how do we do that? Just because you discipline your child does not mean DCFS or whatever your state calls it needs to be involved. That's another organization that they do good work in some cases, but they get overused, they get weaponized just like any other agency.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the family unit is a big part of this. And like you grew up with your mom and dad in the house, right? I assume that, correct?
That is correct.
So I grew up. My parents were separated my whole, as far back as I can remember. And they both did fairly well. They both did great for what we had to work with. And if the family unit was together, yeah, I bet dad would be the one to discipline. But because we're in situations now where families are separating, mom becomes a disciplinary too. But then, like you said before, we end up in a situation where there's definitely a difference between discipline and child abuse. Now, we can go on for hours about where that line is drawn in the sand, but spanking your child because you found him in the closet playing with a lighter is discipline. Spanking your child because he won't clean his room, is that really discipline? Again, if you let's hear your opinion. Put it in the comments below where you draw the line for child abuse versus discipline. And I'll agree with you, Josh. Back in the day, if I talked back to my father, oh boy, you better run as far and wide as you can, but he's going to get you either way. You can run, but you
Yeah,
can't
there's no
hide.
outrunning them.
You can run, and he couldn't keep up, but you weren't hiding. You had to come home sometime. The horse gets hungry at some point.
So bringing back that does help some of the situation, but ultimately we do also look at mental health. Now, I think there is stipulations to this. Now, I don't want the government necessarily to step in and say, "Hey, start doing this," because I'm for small government. I want the least reactions with the government as possible. And I'm going to go back to quoting one of my favorite presidents of all time, Ronald Reagan. The 9 scariest words in the English language are, "We're from the government and we're here to help." Then everything's getting kerfuffled. Everything.
The last thing you want to hear is that. The last thing.
So it's a windy road between I don't want the government involved and okay, without the government getting involved, how do we help mental health? And it's again, people need to realize it's not as stigmatized as it was before. Go get the help you need. And there's for people that don't know and that might be in the middle of, putting that fake smile on and thinking about suicide, there's the National Suicide Crisis Hotline. Go there, talk to people. Don't be scared to reach out. If you have true friends in your life and true family, if you reach out and say, "Hi, I'm struggling," they're going to help you. I can tell you right now, in most of my contacts that I have as personal family or friends to me, if I were to reach out to them people, they would pick up and they would say, "Okay, what do you need?" Get surrounded. I think it's also partly getting surrounded by the right people. Nowadays we're focused on quantity, not the quality of friend. If that friend ain't willing to go to bat for you and be there and pick you up and wipe the dirt off you and say, "Come on, let's go. We're going to do it together," that's not a friend you should have.
Right, and I agree. And some of and again, another way we can get back to where we need to be is people. We need people. We don't need them, but people need to resort back to God and back to church and back to living the way God and the Bible says a Christian or Muslim or whatever your religion is. However your supreme being tells you to live. Going back to those days and living the way that Christians or Muslims should live, and the basic values of, who we are as people. Getting back there would be one step in the right direction as well.
So there's many verses, and I'm going to pick 2 just to keep it kind of short. But you're not wrong. Even in the Bible, Philippians 4:6-7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and repetition, thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and be the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Matthew 6:25-34. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all things will be given to you as well. It's a biblical fact. He knows that we're not perfect and that these things come and happen. But you've got to look back at what you said. Go back to God. Start praying more. Start Thanksgiving more. Ask for the Holy Spirit into your life, and it does help. There are people that talk about this that God has truly saved their lives. They were addicts, like you had spoke about, addicted to drugs, addicted to opiates, whatever it was, you name it. They recovered through Jesus. There was people that were suicidal. They recovered through Jesus. So I really do think it's a part of missing God. And I mentioned that earlier with the wanting to remove the placard out of the city hall. We can't try to erase Christianity from a country it was built on. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, if you think about the way we should live our life as a house, right? This is a weird analogy, but we're gonna go. The foundation of the house is your faith, right? Your faith in Jesus Christ, or your faith in. It doesn't have to be Jesus Christ. Whoever you believe is your supreme being, right? And in our case, it's our Lord Jesus Christ. So the house, the foundation of the house is your faith and your following of Jesus Christ in the way that Jesus wants you to live. And then you go on to the walls of the house. Who you surround yourself, your family, husband, wife, kids, children, family. And going back to our Christian values of, what is that going to also quell? Broken families. The Bible says you should not have intercourse until you're married, right? So what would what would change for there? You'll have, and it's,
No more wedlock.
exactly, you won't have people meeting somebody, dating for 2 years, having a child, and breaking up when they knew in the first place that this wasn't going to work out. This wasn't going to work. We've had commitment issues this whole time. I know hundreds of single parents, single mothers, single fathers, and this all could have been, again, in some cases you're gonna still end up with single families. Like, divorce happens. Even people who go to church, they still and have faith, they still, they still end up, some people still end up divorced. It is what it is, but the percentage would decrease significantly. And I say we start there. We start with faith. We start with, and I'm not perfect. I grew away from the church.
None of us are.
I grew away from the church, and I'm trying to get back. And but I think that's where we need to end up with. And starting with our faith and the foundation of that is a start going in the right direction. And then you work on your personal issues, and and in some cases you focus more on the relationships of people you're with. And I think that's where we need to start to get back to where we need to be in those circumstances. So what do you think, Josh?
No, I mean, I completely agree wholeheartedly. And this is a larger, broader topic than, the little bit we've done on here. And we can do more of this as we go on. If we see enough comments about, hey, we want to see more about the gun violence side, or we want to see more about the National Guard side. But I believe a good start is what we've mentioned so far. A big part of it is bring the family unit back and bring it under Jesus. And then people just need to realize to reach out for help. Because obviously, if gun violence, I said it in the beginning, if gun control was going to quell gun violence, it would have already happened. And we see cases of this every day. Was it Alabama? There was another state that they had just recovered what they call the Glock switch, the auto switch,
Yep.
the most they had ever recovered in recent history. And for those that don't understand, the Glock switch is a switch that makes the Glock a fully automatic pistol. That's not legal in the US. So if gun control worked, how did they get it? Again, because they're criminals. Criminals don't care about the rule of law. And this ties into, again, the National Guard. And I think Trump bringing the National Guard in to quell the violence will ultimately help these numbers in these situations. Just look at the arrests that were made. There were a crud load of arrests, and it helped our immigration. Again, huge topic. But immigration is a huge part of that gun violence you see, and violence in general.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And when you have people who, and it's not about being against immigration, right? It's just understanding, knowing that the way we live in America is different to the way people live in other countries. And people in other countries, like let's say Mexico or Venezuela or El Salvador, they live differently than we do here in America. So something that might be acceptable in their country doesn't work here. Maybe in one of those other countries like Mexico, maybe it's a norm to force yourself on a woman. I don't know. But here in America, that's not okay. And, these people, I think we need, again, we can go on for hours about immigration, but the point of the matter is get back to your faith. People need to get back to the faith, reach out for help, and work on their relationships with other people. ultimately. And like you said before too, criminals don't follow the law. When states impose gun restrictions or bans, who is that really affecting? That's affecting the law, the people who follow the law, the people that follow the law. In other countries who ban guns, outrightly ban guns, you're gonna tell me no one in that country still has a firearm? Why do they have
It's
it? Because they are criminals. They do not. And if any of our local state people see this video, I'm gonna say one more time for you to listen again. Criminals do not follow the law.
I feel like we've sat on a broken record and it just keeps skipping of us just saying criminals don't follow the law.
And you got to look at other states who, for instance, are constitutional carrier, like New Hampshire, Texas, Florida, Alabama. Their crime rates are significantly lower than states like Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Chicago. Do we continue? The list goes on. The list just goes on.
New York's a different story, though. New York claims that New York City subways never have guns on them just because it has a sign out front that says no guns allowed.
Yeah, did you see that in the news? I seen that yesterday. New York banned
Justice
firearms.
Clarence Thomas,
on all,
I'm pretty sure, was probably laughing.
On all trains and subways. Did you not just see what happened to that poor Ukrainian refugee? Did you not just see what happened? That's like saying, we're going to ban guns during war. We're going to send you running into a war field without a bullet.
Can I get a stress card?
No, you don't even get that. We're going to send you to war.
You're telling me?
Without a gun, without a vest, without water and food, and we expect you to win the war. You're kidding me, right? And
yeah.
Again, I'm going on a tangent, and you probably are agreeing with everything I'm saying. I'm going to say it one more time. Criminals don't follow the law. Maura Healey, if you hear this, criminals don't follow the law.
I don't think she's listening to us there, buddy.
And half these people who are making these laws banning, here in Massachusetts we have an assault weapons ban. They don't even know what an assault weapon is.
Assault weapon is anything you assault someone with, so technically, should bats be banned?
I'm going to throw my phone at you. Is that an assault phone now?
Yes, it is. According to the methodology that they're using.
I'm going to throw a water bottle at you, assault water bottle. And that goes back to AR. AR is not assault rifle. Again, AR is not assault rifle.
It's Armalite. Stands for the company that originally manufactured.
If you look at the statistics as well, most gun violence happens with a pistol. Most gun violence. Well,
and just for those, it's just funny to me at this point.
Yeah. Well, anyways, folks. Oh, hold on. Go ahead.
Or I love it when Congress people stand on the steps of Capitol and are like, hold up an AR, and they're like, this gun fires 30 rounds in 1 second. I don't know whose AR you're holding, but it ain't mine because it don't work that way.
Or they say these ARs are automatic rifles, weapons of war.
Yeah, nothing. You have to have a special license to get a automatic rifle, and it's very hard to get that license.
This is insane. And that is the topic for now. We can go on for hours about guns and Second Amendment. But anyways, folks, thanks for tuning in here at the Overcaffeinated and Dysfunctional podcast. Make sure to give us a like and follow on at the Overcaffeinated and Dysfunctional podcast on Spotify. And make sure to go over and follow us on X at Overcaff_pod. That's OVERCAFF_pod on X. Click the link in the description and follow us for more platforms we're going to be creating here in the near future. And again, thanks for tuning in again.
Thank you.